And now we're being joined by Judah, journalist, and Vadim Cheptanaru, journalist from TVR Moldova. Good evening, sirs.
Good evening.
Good to have you. Let's just set the scene here in terms of what we've seen so far. Looking at Moldova, I mean, on the one side, we have President Sandu going very much staking her next presidency on the European Union, but at the same time, looking at a lot of threats coming from Russia. What is the trajectory right now of Moldova? What's the latest? Please, let's start with you, Jakob, excuse me.
Well, the trajectory for Moldova since under Maya Sandu has been to accelerate its pathway towards the European Union. And this agreement that we're talking about now, I think, fits kind of well within that. This is about making cooperation with the European Union easier, making it deeper, and ensuring that Moldova is really locked into a European pathway.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and just a reminder of viewers, we're talking about this new security pact and defense pact that was signed just recently, I think in the last day or so. And it's actually one of the very first, not just for Moldova, but for a non-EU country to do something like this. So walk us through a little bit of what we can expect here, Vadim, from this. I mean, it's I think, a really significant moment to have this kind of deal. What can we expect out of that? What's the impact going to be for Moldova?
Good evening, and thank you very much for the invitation. I would like to start with the beginning. As we all know, the Russian Federation is waging a war with the Republic of Moldova as well, but a hybrid one, equal dangerous, which aims to install people loyal to the Kremlin at the government. Here we are talking about the fugitive oligarch Ilan Shor, sentenced to 15 years in prison in the case of the theft of 1 billion euros from the state budget, and who is hiding in Russia now, and which is a favorite of Moscow. Though people affiliated with him, they are trying to hijack the country's European path by spreading fakes, organizing protests with the participation of dangerous people, massive cyber attacks, multiple false bomb alerts, constant threats from Kremlin officials, and so on. And what I would like to say is, in more than 30 years of independence of the country, almost nobody did not invest in defense just because we're a neutral country. But we see that neutrality cannot defend us against the threats of the Russian Federation. So under this condition, the security and defense partnership between the Republic of Moldova and the European Union is not a military structure, as some political parties from Chisinau affiliated to Kremlin has started already to manipulate. It is a political document, and the collaboration will be a political one as well, at the level of the central public authorities, such as the government, parliament, other key state institutions, and so on.
Right, but what about security and some form of military cooperation? I believe there were joint exercises a while back, right, in Moldova, so there's some steps being taken. Jacob, if you could perhaps explain that.
Yeah, so there were joint exercises with the Americans and the Romanians last year. I mean, I think the important thing here is to look at the trends. I mean, basically, since the invasion of Ukraine, Moldova has been forced to grapple with as your other guest said, kind of the fact that it is militarily and security vulnerable, and that now it's looking to have foreign Western partners help build capacity and build many of the things that were not invested in for 30 years. In this document, I mean, if you read the document, much of it is Moldova and the European Union will continue. So a lot of this is in process already. I mean, agencies, for example, like Frontex, have been on the ground for a long time. I mean, there's a European partnership mission that has been in Moldova since last year that is supposed to support combating Russian disinformation and improving kind of cybersecurity defense. I mean, these are the things that Moldova really needs help with, and these are the things that the European Union can help with and that the Moldovan government is looking for.
Mm-hmm. Also, let's focus in a little bit on the breakaway region of Transnistria, which is very much, I think, a core to a lot of the issues in Moldova. But we also have the autonomous region of Gagauzia. That's right. Gagauzia. If we're mispronouncing, I apologize. Now, Vladimir Putin has taken an interest in that region as well. How much are these areas now liabilities for Moldova moving forward, Vadim, into the European family?
Well, I've talked about Ilan Shor. He has his person in Gagauzia. It's Evgenia Gutul, the Bashkan of the region. So as we have seen, she goes very often to Moscow, and she takes the orders from Vladimir Putin, and she doesn't hide those facts. About Transnistria, as we know, European Union doesn't accept any new members with unsolved conflicts. There is an exception, Cyprus, but Chisinau hopes to integrate the country by the integration time in European Union. Also, the majority of people from Transnistrian region have Moldovan citizenship. They do work to the right side of Dnistru River. They travel in European Union as we do. They even make trade with European Union. Let's just say some numbers. In the first quarter of 2024, the share of exports from the Transnistrian region in the European Union reached 80.9%, and that of imports 56.3%. People from there want a civilized life without being afraid to live in a separatist region. So I think the conflict will get to be solved by people from there wishing a better life. There are at least 1,500 Russian soldiers in Transnistria. And of course, Russia will try to use this region to blackmail Moldova on its European path. But at this moment, everyone understands that they are just words. And about Gagauzia, there are still Russian television working on there. Russian televisions, and there's a lot of Russian propaganda. So Chisinau has to get rid of it because it doesn't help.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, you mentioned there, Vadim, unfortunately, the presence of Russian troops in Transnistria. We're not sure of the exact number, but then also you're saying that this process is something, reintegration of this region into Moldova, it's not a problem, but it becomes a problem if we have Russian troops there. Now, I'm just wondering, given the complexities of that, will they just leave? I mean, what's the situation on the ground? Is this something that we could expect to become more of a leverage tool for Putin? Is this just for show? You alluded that the people there are actually more integrated into Moldova than would have us believe. But what is the danger of potential Russian troops there that are already there, we don't know their number, in preventing Moldova from going through with further accession processes?
There is not much danger from them now because there's Ukraine from one side and the Republic of Moldova from the other side. And as we know, Russia cannot come into the region, Transnistrian region, even from a Republic of Moldova, even from Ukraine, because there is a war. So they are just now quiet. They are trying sometimes to say something just to make Moldova to be more afraid of what may happen over there. But they're just words, as I said, and no actions, fortunately. And we hope that things will stay like that, but not for a long time. Hopefully, the conflict will be solved very, very soon.
Jacob, let me turn to you. I wanted to ask you about the EU accession talks, right? Because Moldova began the process in December of 23, right? They were actually, the accession talks started, right? And the plan is, from what I gathered, to wrap this up by 2030, when the country would like to join the EU. But then there are countries such as Ukraine, which are, of course, also struggling and fighting against Russia, that are being sort of given a fast track, or at least this is what the rhetoric is, right? So I wonder, what is the feeling in Moldova on that? I mean, wouldn't Moldovans want to get to the EU faster and also perhaps be treated in that way because of Transnistria and Gagauzia and other sort of problematic situation in the country?
Look, I mean, the answer to all these questions when it comes to Moldova's European integration is that everything depends on what happens in Ukraine, and that there aren't answers to this question until something is sorted in Ukraine. I mean, you were talking about Transnistria a minute ago. I mean, ultimately, all of these questions, what future Transnistria has, what future Moldova has open to it, it is just dependent on Ukraine ultimately winning or sort of Russia not winning in Ukraine. So it's difficult to say. I mean, Moldova until now has been riding Ukraine's coattails towards the European Union, and so Moldova has benefited from this in some sense. I think it would have been difficult to see Moldova at such a stage of this European integration process had the invasion of Ukraine not happened. And as long as Ukraine can continue going on an accelerated pathway, then Moldova will be able to too.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, interesting how they're so linked, but at the same time, I mean, I remember we were there at that UCO Council when this was finally announced. The details, as they say, the devil's in the details. Remember, it's those 35 acquae that they have to get through. But interesting, you point to Ukraine, but we've also seen a shift to having also, let's not forget the Western Balkans, right? There's also that focus there. So this is another tricky sort of blend on, let's say, who gets priority. But you're right. I mean, I think until European elections are finished, we won't have much movement in any of those directions. Let's talk about elections, because we do have, I believe, that referendum, that EU referendum coming up in Moldova. We also have Sandu running again as well, also in the autumn. So tell us how this might play out, and what could we expect? Are there any surprises or potential challenges to that whole process? Let's go back to you, Vadim, for that.
Yeah, the government is taking real steps to get rid of Russian dependency, and as we have seen, it is really possible. Moldova uses no more gas trades, no more gas from Russia, and that's why it's so important to strengthen our security institutions and capacity to defend our informational space from Russian propaganda and interference in democratic processes. Moldova hopes to join, to start accession negotiation to European Union on June 25th, but Chisinau still has a backlog regarding the election of the general prosecutor. We have election this year, a very important exercise for our democracy. The presidential elections and the referendum on EU accession. Everyone is concerned that Russian Federation will intensify its efforts to divert the European course of the country. Will try to influence the elections so that someone loyal person to Moscow will fake win elections, for example. That's why it is so important to up-to-date our security capabilities, and this agreement that has been signed yesterday in Brussels is as well very important for our country these days.
Right. So, Jacob, one last quick question for you, because we've been discussing this throughout the show, Russia's territorial ambitions and sort of places such as Abkhazia and South Ossetia, which are two separatist pro-Russian states, which are actually recognizing Transnistria as an independent state. So this is quite interesting. But I wanted to ask you about similarities between Moldova and Georgia.
I mean, Moldova and Georgia are quite different. I mean, I'm not an expert on Georgia, so maybe it would not be correct for me to draw one directly there. But ultimately, one of the differences is that kind of Moldova is run by a pro-European administration that is trusted in Brussels, and that Brussels wants to do everything to help. I mean, there are partners in Europe that are really extending a hand. I mean, France, for example, is one. I mean, we're talking about security. I mean, in March, a defence cooperation was signed with the French. There's talk of a French defence mission opening in Chisinau, and also weapon sales between France and Moldova. I mean, these are things that I think would not be on the agenda right now for Tbilisi, but I'm not an expert on Georgia.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, but I think ultimately, as you said, there is that very much tied with EU aspirations at the same time that the Kremlin stepping in to try and stop it. So I think a lot of these places are shared. Look, fascinating insights there. Thank you, both of you. That was Jacob Judah, journalist, and Vadim Cheptanaru from TVR Moldova. Thank you.
Thank you.